This happened in the summer of 2010 when I was just entering my teenage years. My family and I took a trip to a really nice hotel in the city. I can't remember why we decided to take the trip, but I do recall that many of our family friends came along and stayed in adjacent rooms. To preface, I have always been a bit of a scaredy cat. As a pretty skinny and fragile kid, I tend to get spooked quite easily, even to this day. However, this particular incident was definitely not me freaking myself out like I usually do. In retrospect, I consider myself incredibly lucky for trusting my instincts. Now let me describe the peculiar design of the hotel. The lobby was actually located on the 4th floor rather than the ground floor, which struck me as very unusual. To access the lobby, you had to use the elevator. There was no way for you to get to it from the stairs. This information would have been nice before everything happened. As you'll find out, the hotel was organized in a square shape. Every floor was lined with a balcony, and you could look down into the lobby and cafe area from your floor. Essentially, if you were walking to your room, you could be seen from anyone that was on your floor if they just stepped out of their room and looked out. I was always afraid I'd fall over the balcony and sailed down 8 stories to my death, but they were high enough to a point where I wasn't too concerned for my safety. The first 2 days were nice. My friends and I hung out and played cards all day, or we watched whatever was on TV at night. We'd explore the halls of the hotel and tell each other ghost stories. It was a really fun time, even though I didn't fully understand why we were there. On the 3rd day, though, things got strange fast. I woke up to the sound of screaming coming from outside my door. Now, because of the hotel's design I mentioned, sounds from the lobby would echo all the way up to the top of the building. So when I walked outside to investigate, I immediately looked over the balcony to see what the commotion was about. I saw a girl laying on the ground surrounded by eggs and milk that had splattered everywhere around her. People were rushing to help her, and I heard a couple people telling each other to call 911. It seemed like the girl was unconscious. Maybe she had passed out or something. I scanned the area below and saw that my family and a couple of my friends were in the lobby getting breakfast, all staring at the event in front of them. I decided I'd rush down to meet them to find out what happened. The elevator was on the opposite side of my floor, so I took the stairwell located right next to my room. We were on the 7th or 8th floor, so I knew I only had to take about 4 flights down, which wasn't a big deal. I descended for a little while looking for the number 4 on the wall, or the letter L. I passed floor 5 ready to find a door to the lobby. I took about 2 more flights of steps before realizing that there hadn't been a door for the 4th floor, nor had there been a door for the 3rd or 2nd. Now, I probably should have turned back, but I continued down because I was tired and didn't want to climb back up. There were some weird side hallways that went into pitch black areas with a bunch of piping and wiring, and though I was curious to explore, I passed them by. I quickly hit the bottom floor, which was a dimly lit and cold room with cinder block walls and concrete floors. In front of me, there was a set of double doors. I hesitated at first, but I assumed that this was just another way back to the lobby. So I opened them and entered. Behind the doors, there was a massive warehouse-type room, probably the size of a smaller basketball stadium. The only light coming in was from the stairwell behind me, so I wasn't really able to see much. Chairs were stacked and covered in plastic wrap, tables lined the wall, and in the distance I thought I could see boxes stacked and lined against the wall as well. I assumed I was probably in the storage room. I looked around and saw an elevator in the back of the room, so I made my way towards it. I closed the door to the stairwell and began to walk into the dimly lit room. The room was muggy and dusty, and it seemed like nobody had been down there in a long time. As I got closer to the elevator, I noticed it was a little bigger than the elevators in the lobby and other floors. I pressed the up button, but got no response. There was a card swiper next to the button. It must have been for employees only. I turned back towards the stairwell doors, making my way past the chairs and tables along the way. When I got to the door, I gave it a tug. It was locked. Great. I thought to myself, this is when things started to hit me and I realized I was stuck in the dark, dusty basement of the hotel. I didn't have a phone at the time because my parents wouldn't let me get one until I graduated middle school, so I couldn't call anyone for help. Everyone likely assumed I was still asleep in the room, so I began to freak out, realizing that nobody was going to look for me. I searched around the warehouse looking for other ways out. Some areas of the place were better lit than others, so I looked around in areas I could see before heading to the darker sides of the room. There was one other set of doors that I found, but it happened to be locked as well. I began to cry, scared that nobody would ever find me in the basement. It felt like hours, but only a handful of minutes passed before I heard the door creak open. It wasn't the door from the stairwell. It was the second door I had found. A slim, middle-aged man in a lab coat came out of the doors. Now, if this was a 21-year-old me seeing this man, I would be very confused as to why this guy was wearing a lab coat in a hotel. I was only 12 or 13 at the time, so I immediately was relieved at the sight of an adult who looked smart. I approached him, tears in my eyes, and he immediately looked surprised to see me, as you'd expect. "What are you doing down here?" he yelled. "I got lost on my way down to the lobby, and I've been locked in here. Do you have a key?" I was shaking, eager to get out of there. He didn't answer my question, but instead he said, "I know a way out of here. Follow me." He began to walk towards the doors with the stairwell, and I followed, relieved that someone had finally come to save me. We approached the doors, and I began to reach for the handle, but he continued walking. "Isn't it right here?" I asked him. I will never forget the look on his face when I said that. He looked nervous, and though it was dim, I could see sweat glistening from his forehead and behind his glasses. "No, this way," he said sternly. I continued to follow him, but I was now nervous myself. We had passed the door to the stairs, and were now headed toward a darker side of the basement, away from the elevators. He looked like he had no clue where he was leading me, as he kept checking around him, almost as if he was taking in his surroundings for the first time. We turned a corner and began walking towards the boxes, seeing that it was a dead end. I immediately froze, realizing that something was very wrong. This guy had no idea where he was going, and he did not appear to work at the hotel. In a trembling voice I said, "Where are we going?" He turned and said, "This way, just follow me." I knew that there were no doors by those boxes since I had checked there. After I found out the stairwell door was locked, something in my gut told me I had to do something, so I started yelling as loud as I could. I yelled so loud, I gave myself a headache. The man irritated him, plugging his ears, began yelling back at me. "What are you doing?" I continued to yell. I don't even remember how long I was yelling. Finally, the man snapped and began quickly walking towards me. I went in a full sprint towards the stairwell doors, hoping that they'd magically open somehow. He didn't run after me, but he walked sternly behind me, muttering under his breath. He walked up to me and threw me up against the wall, and began dragging me by my leg to the dark side of the room. I kept screaming, trying to free myself, when somebody bursted through the door. It was a hotel janitor who had heard the screaming from the stairwell. He saw the situation and immediately ran over to the guy screaming at him to let go. He did, so I got up as fast as I could where he told me to get behind him. The janitor asked me who the man was, and I told him I had no idea, and explained that he came through the door on the other side of the room where I pointed to. The janitor radioed into the desk that he found a child in the basement. The man in the lab coat started trying to argue with the janitor, claiming that he simply was looking for the bathroom. The janitor clearly wasn't buying it, and told them to wait until security got there and talk to them about it. I was standing beside him the whole time, trying to take in everything that was happening. Eventually, an employee from the front desk arrived and took me back up the steps to the lobby where I met with my family, who surprisingly had no idea I was missing. I told him the story, crying and shaking, and they hugged me tightly. I don't have any information as to what happened to him afterwards or who he was. However, I learned that the door I found led to the street on the side of the building where he must have wandered in from. I have no clue as to what his intentions were, or why he was wearing a lab coat. The only thing I know for sure is if I hadn't screamed my lungs out, I might not have been telling this story. I'm a 22-year-old female, and I work for a pretty well-known health club in the northwest of England. I've been on a pretty simple path of self-improvement, while also working part-time and studying at university. Therefore, when my manager asked me if I wanted to do a lifeguard qualification for our poolside, I happily agreed. It was an all-expense-paid trip, so I never would have said no. Anyway, they'd pay for my travel, which is about an hour away from where I was living. So I was covered for gas, the hotel, food, and the course. The course was set up where we go 3 days in a row, take 4 days off, and then 3 days on. The first 3 days went really well. I found my hotel pretty easily, and although it was in a dodgy-looking area, I slept well and the staff were nothing but helpful. I was hoping to return to the same hotel for my last 3 days. However, the day before I was due to return to do my last 3 days, my manager told me that the hotel was fully booked. He quickly booked me another one, which was in the middle of the town center. I looked up the hotel online, and the exterior wasn't very flattering, but I only had to stay there for 2 nights. I went to my first day of lifeguard training as normal. One of the local girls told me the hotel I was about to stay at had no on-site parking. She also mentioned that all the surrounding car parks only allowed you to stay for 2 hours. She suggested that it would be best to leave my car at the training center, and offered to take me to my hotel and pick me up for training each morning. It was very helpful for me in my situation, so I thanked her and took her up on the offer. After finishing for the day, I got into her car, and she took me to my hotel. She also mentioned that she used to rent this hotel, which was a small family-run business and not a chain. The hotel didn't serve food, so she told me the McDonald's and Subway were probably my best bet. When I arrived on my first night at the hotel, the lobby seemed nice, although there was construction in all the surrounding rooms. The clerk at the front desk greeted me and began to check me in. She smiled and told me that my room was upgraded, but she didn't know why I didn't question it since I was just happy to be in the executive suite. She walked me to my room, which was like a maze. You needed a special key card to get to the executive suites. This meant that other people in the hotel weren't able to access this area. Upon entering my room, I was amazed. I've never been in something so classy. The room was massive, and on the left there were stairs to the bathroom. There was a balcony, queen-size bed, a couch TV with Netflix, and a table full of complimentary water, tea, and biscuits. I chilled for a while, and then suddenly realized how hungry I was, and I thought I should make my way over to McDonald's or Subway, before it got any darker outside. Everything was great until things started to get weird. When I was on my way back from McDonald's, I returned to the hotel where I got my key card ready to swipe into the executive suites. As I walked up to the door, there was a man standing right next to it, dressed in a suit. We looked at each other for a moment before I walked past and scanned the door open. I automatically regretted it. The man followed me through, very closely. Now, I'm a very nervous person. I panic at everything, so of course I panicked when I realized I was being followed. I thought to myself, better be safe than sorry, and literally ran to my room. When I got to the door, I turned my head slightly to see that the man had actually kept up with me. I started to weep as I opened my door, extremely clumsily, threw myself in, and slammed the door shut. In retrospect, I probably should have called the front desk, so as to why I didn't, I don't know. At the time, I felt like I had done the right thing. I eventually calmed myself down and decided to shower, then watched Netflix before bed. I left the bathroom door wide open, which had a clear view to the front door. As I was brushing my teeth, I heard a noise that sounded like it came from the front door. I looked up and instantly felt my heart drop. The door was wide open. I ran to the bathroom door, then slammed it shut and locked it. I sank to the floor and started crying. After a minute or so, I tried getting it together, so I turned off the shower so I could listen closely. Although I expected to hear something, but I didn't. It was completely silent. In my panic state, I messaged my best friend who replied right away. We texted back and forth for a while until she convinced me that I'd probably made it up in my head and to go check it out. I gave her the hotel name and my room number, just in case something happened. I told her that if I didn't reply in 5 minutes, no matter what, just call the police for me, and she agreed and I left the bathroom. As I crept around, everything looked normal. I checked under the bed, balcony, wardrobe, and just about everywhere, but it was just me. I thought about manually locking the door with the lock that's normally on hotel room doors, but there wasn't one. This freaked me out a bit, but I laughed at myself, grabbed one of the free bottles of water, and went to sleep shortly after. When I woke up the next day, I got ready quickly because I overslept, so grabbed the last bottle of water off the desk and ran outside to meet the girl who was picking me up for training. After training, I was dropped off at the hotel relatively early to prepare for the next day's assessment. I was pretty overheated, which was only amplified when I walked into my unair-conditioned room. I instantly noticed that none of the complimentary waters had been restocked, so I assumed it was maybe just a one-off, considering I didn't pay full price for the room. I laid down and relaxed for maybe 30 minutes, feeling exhausted from the heat. I don't even remember falling asleep, but I passed out. I was quickly awakened to a loud slam. I felt groggy and didn't open my eyes right away. When I did, it took my eyes a few seconds to adjust. I brushed it off quickly until I sat up straight. My eyes focused on the table, which was now full of complimentary water next to me. I realized there was a black ankle sock that was definitely not mine. I looked around and realized that one of the pairs of socks I had on my suitcase was missing a sock. It was like someone took off their sock and put on mine. My mind automatically thought it had to be staff. Therefore, I didn't complain to management. This wasn't a chain hotel where a creepy employee could be held accountable. I barricaded myself into the room and barely slept that night. Upon checkout, an elderly man was at the desk who I had only ever seen in passing. He asked if I liked my room. I tried to be polite and told him yes, which I began to question myself about again. He told me that my manager had rained the day before I arrived, and he decided to give me a quiet room to myself, which he, in quote, likes to do for the younger girl. He then asked me to leave a good review. I began to feel uneasy again, but had my lifeguard assessment that day, so I pushed it to the back of my mind. I ended up passing and drove home. It wasn't until I was sitting in my own bed that the situation really hit me. Something wasn't sitting right with me. So I went on the hotel's TripAdvisor, something I should have done at the start. Out of the 4 reviews I read, I bothered to read any further before feeling too sick to continue. 3 contained a warning to women. Men were trying to get into their rooms, and staff would walk in unannounced. Even when they were confronted, the staff would deny it. This was when I knew I had not made what happened up in my head. People or person have been coming into my room while I slept, staying for an unknown period of time, stealing my clothing. It still sends chills down to my spine, just thinking about it. I let my managers know who has made a complaint against the company, but so far nothing has come back. I don't know what else to do about the situation. I work for a company in medical sales, and my position often requires me to travel at least 2 or 3 weekends in a month. I have a company credit card, so I use it whenever I travel since it covers the expenses. I booked a single room to an Airbnb house, since it was literally 2 minutes away from the building I had a meet at when I arrived. I was supposed to arrive at night, and then attend a meeting at 8 a.m. the next morning. I arrived at the airport with my small amount of luggage, since I was only staying for 1 night. My flight got delayed 3 times, so I had to ask the company if they could reschedule the meeting to the next day. Luckily, I got a response that night, and they said we could meet the next day at 8 a.m. Since my flight was delayed, I had to extend my stay at the Airbnb for an extra night, which worked out, since the next day my room wasn't booked. After waiting in the airport all night, my flight finally took off, and I arrived around noon. I ordered an Uber to take me from the airport to my Airbnb. As I arrived, I noticed that the driveway had 4 other cars in it, which wasn't surprising since the house was being rented out by multiple people at once. I rang the doorbell and was greeted by the host, who was super friendly and welcoming. He showed me to my room, and I locked myself in, unpacking my tiny bag of clothes and unloading my work stuff. That room was nothing special, but it was all I needed given the occasion. It had a king-size bed, bathroom, and a window that overlooked the busy main road it was located on. Since I had the entire day to myself, I decided to watch Netflix on my laptop. A few hours went by as I relaxed and became more tired. It was only around 6 p.m. or so I forced myself to stay awake a bit longer so that I wouldn't throw off my sleep schedule. As I got myself ready for bed, I heard the front door to the house slammed shut, and I listened as a couple walked in, being extremely loud and obnoxious. I was a bit annoyed, but I wasn't very upset considering I chose this house. Knowing that this could potentially happen, I guess I was more worried about finding a place that was close to the meeting I had to attend. I pulled the blankets up and closed my eyes and started to doze off, until I was startled awake to yelling and screaming, coming from the room next to me. It sounded like a couple that was obnoxiously loud when they came in earlier. I laid in bed as I listened to the argument, hoping they would stop. Instead, their voices became increasingly louder and angrier with every sentence. I wasn't exactly sure what they were arguing about, but it sounded like it had to do something with the guy accusing the girl of cheating. Minutes passed by, until I heard a knock on their door. I got up as quietly as possible, and put my ear up to the door to try to hear the conversation. It was the Airbnb owner, who was not happy with the couple, and asked them to leave. The man stormed out of the house, and I watched as he walked towards the main road, yelling and screaming to himself. I crept back over the door, and listened as the woman in the house owner spoke. Apparently, the woman convinced the owner that she would be quiet, and that there wouldn't be any more problems since the boyfriend left. I heard the woman close the door to the room, and listened as the owner walked down the hall, and went back downstairs. I crawled back into bed, and finally fell asleep. I remember being in the middle of a dream when I faint heard a voice. I kept repeating the same thing over and over. I started to wake up, quite confused, thinking that it was in my dream until I heard it again. It was a man's voice coming from outside my window, who kept saying to come out and talk. I quickly realized that it was the boyfriend from earlier. I didn't want to say anything, obviously not wanting to involve myself with the situation, until he started knocking on my window. Each knock grew louder with every hit, and I knew I had to say something. I walked up to the window, and knelt down so I could crack it open, and tell him that he had the wrong room. He seemed to be very intoxicated as he slurred some words I couldn't make out. So I closed the window. I sat down in bed, hoping he had gone away, until he started screaming right outside my window to be let in. I didn't know what to do, so I just sat there, frozen, trying not to make any noise. Just as the screaming finally stopped, I was startled to hear the sound of shattering glass. A large rock came flying in through my window. I knew I had to get out and find help, so I sprinted to the door. As I opened it, I turned around to see his 2 hands on the windowsill as he was trying to climb in. I slammed the door shut behind me, and ran downstairs looking for the owner, who was about to walk outside with his rifle. I told him that the boyfriend came back, and thought that I was his girlfriend, and that he broke the window and was climbing in, as I ran out of the room. He walked upstairs aiming his rifle at the door. He shouted asking if anyone was in there, but there was no response. I watched him at the bottom of the stairs as he quietly opened the squeaky door to my room, and flipped on the lights. He said that he was gone, and I was relieved to go back up so I could get my stuff. Once he made the announcement to me, people staying in other rooms upstairs opened their doors, and peeked out, including the girlfriend of the crazed boyfriend. She was sobbing and completely shocked as she walked out with her suitcase to leave. I thanked the owner for helping, and I went back into my room to pack and find a hotel for the night. Thankfully, I was able to make it to my meeting the next morning and fly back home unharmed.